Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. If you own or are buying a carbon bike, or any material or frame for that matter, then we'd strongly recommend investing in a torque wrench. Carbon is a notoriously fragile material, and it's not possible to know whether you have over-tightened or under-tightened a bolt when tightening something by hand, despite some people being able to proclaim that they can achieve the correct torque by hand. A torque wrench is an incredibly useful tool that measures how much force you are tightening a bolt up to, and this force is known as torque, and it prevents you from under or over tightening bolts. This is a particular problem with modern lightweight carbon components, as carbon generally doesn't like to be clamped and has marginal tolerances. If something is over tightened, then it will fracture and fail. We see this often here at CBR, for example with fractured seat clamps or steerer tubes, generally somewhere where a carbon part directly clamps onto. It's also possible to under-tighten parts, so for example if you've got a seat post that goes into a carbon frame, if you don't torque that properly, if you over-torque it, then you can fracture around the seat clamp, but if you under-tighten it, then the post could slip and it could fracture the seat tube from where the post is being rammed down the frame. So either way, without using a torque wrench, you can cause damage. So what is torque? Well, look at your bike and you'll observe that most bolts have a small number next to them, generally in Nm, which is known as Newton meters, or sometimes inch pounds. So this is the unit that the torque is measured in, and it's the torque that bolts require. When you're looking at this writing, check to see if it says max torque, because if it does say max, then that really is the max. Generally, you should aim for 10% lower. Sometimes, such as on Shimano crank pinch bolts, you'll be given a range, so on those it's 12 to 15. Generally aim for the middle of that range. Most bolts on a carbon bicycle require quite a low torque compared to other applications, so generally under 10 Newton meters, with the exception of items such as the crank bolts or the cassette, which are generally around the 40 mark. You can buy bicycle-specific ones for the lower torques, but you need to get a bigger torque wrench for the higher torques, and the most you'd ever need to torque something on a bike is 6 Newton meters, for example on a Campagnolo crank bolt. There are various types of torque wrench on the market with different ranges. So I've got a whole range here in front of me. The best and most common is the adjustable click type torque wrench, so one of these here. That does regrettably mean they are the most expensive type, and they'll set you anywhere from £30 up to £200. That's quite a range in price, so what exactly do you get for your money when you spend more? Well, the greater accuracy is the biggest difference, and ultimately a torque wrench is only useful if it is accurate. That's the whole point of it. Other differences, as you spend more, include better quality bits, and the dial indicator is easier to read and set, therefore there is less margin for error. It's not something that you'd really think about, but for example on this torque wrench here, when you set, so if you look at the green line here, when you are adjusting the torque and setting it at the number, you can clearly see the number that it's on. So at the moment I'm clearly at 5, but on some of the cheaper torque wrenches, depending on how you look at the torque wrench, so if you look at it at an angle, that might not be 5, it might read as if it's at 4 or at 6. So something like this that's crystal clear is something that you're paying the money for, but if you're torquing something to a number, then it should be obvious what the number is, so it's a really important feature. If you're not particularly mechanically minded and intend on only using a torque wrench for items such as the stem and seat bolts, you could save some money and buy a preset one based on torques required on your specific bike. So this is one of these here. You can often buy preset 4, 5 or 6 Newton meter torque wrenches. So for example, this Bontrager one here is preset to 5 Newton meters for a 4mm bolt. So for example on many seat clamps or stem bolts, this is perfect. This Park Tool one here has a range between 4 and 6, and you set the range by, you see there's a dial here, by simply changing the setting, and you can remove the bit that's at the end like that, and inside is stored, inside there's some more bits stored in here, and you can fit any 1/4 inch bit in here, so it's another option that you could consider. So with something like this, as this is quite stubby and it's an awkward shape, if you're running an integrated seat clamp, for example, where the bolt's at an angle, you might not be able to get this in because of its shape. So these two types aren't perfect for everything, but they are in certain applications. So if this doesn't work, then that's where the adjustable one would come in, or a different design. As you can see, each torque wrench has its own pros and cons depending on the application it's being used for. These options that are preset are typically lighter weight than an adjustable type, so they'd be a really good option for if you're going on holiday, for example, where you can't carry one of these and a selection of bits. A less prevalent type, but one that's emerging in the market and one that I'm a big fan of, is a portable bit-style ratchet with a torque feature. So this Silka tie torque is a rare example of a modular T and L handle bit-based system that includes a torque bar. So you've got a selection of bits here, so let's take one out. And this is just a normal ratchet as it is now, as a T handle. I can make it into an L handle if I want to, depending on the application. And if I want to measure torque on it, then it comes with a torque bar just here. Again, you can use it as a T or L handle. When you're using the torque bar, you can put the bit in there, and then it's got a scale on the side. So as you're tightening the bolt, you need to read the arrow and see what number it's pointing at, and then that way you know you've achieved the desired torque. So something like this in particular, I'm finding is an excellent option for holidays, because you can just carry it on the bike. It's pretty compact, and you've got everything there you need, and you've got a regular Allen key function for most things that could go wrong on a ride. So it's something to consider, and something that I think more brands are starting to offer. A final option that isn't here is a beam-style torque wrench. And a beam-style torque wrench is what was commonplace before the adjustable and click-type options existed. They aren't very common anymore, as I've just said, because they're less reliable and accurate. So how they work is you have to carefully read the beam in relation to a scale to know that you've achieved the correct torque. And that requires having a very steady hand, which is a far less accurate option than these options, given how you just set it at the number and it clicks when it's at the right torque. So I'd personally disregard this option, but that said, it's certainly better to use a beam-style torque wrench than not to use anything. It's really important how you operate a torque wrench, as it is still possible to under or over tighten bolts with one if you're not careful. So firstly, make sure you're holding it properly. So if you're holding the tool by the head or in the middle, then you're putting more torque through the bolt than what you are intending. You should hold the torque wrench by the grip, so here, as that's how it's been designed to use, and that's the most accurate way of achieving the correct torque. Make sure you take care of your torque wrench, so whenever you're not using it, you can reset it to virtually 0, or the lowest setting that's on here. So this one, the lowest setting happens to be 2. Every torque wrench is different. If you don't do this, so if you left it set at 10, for example, then over time the spring will lose its tension and the torque won't be calibrated accurately. And if that's the whole point of the torque wrench, to make sure that you're torquing it to the correct number. If you suspect your torque wrench has lost its calibration, then most quality manufacturers have a service where you can send it back to them, and generally for a small fee they can recalibrate it for you. And going back to what I said before about reasons why you'd want to spend more money, perhaps this is another reason why it's a good thing to spend the money on a better quality option, because you're then backed up by an aftercare facility such as this. Here at CBR, we send our torque wrenches off once a year back to the manufacturer to be serviced. Another thing to bear in mind is if you are tightening bolts where there are 2 or more, such as on a stem, then make sure you tighten each bolt evenly rather than fully torque one and then the other. This will allow even tension in the system and will ensure the correct fit. Likewise, if there are 4, then again you want to make sure you're tightening them evenly. So tighten them in an X pattern for the same reason. It is also important that you prepare the relevant component you're fitting. It's always worth adding a lower strength thread lock or an anti-seize to prevent the bolt from loosening over time. but by doing this it also allows you to tighten the bolt up to a lower torque. You should always have preparation on the bolts, never ever run them dry. Finally, it's important to have mechanical sympathy. If when you're tightening or torquing a bolt and it doesn't feel right, just stop and assess the situation. Ultimately, the ideal torque wrench depends on how frequently you intend to use it and what parts of the bike you intend to use it for. I'd always recommend investing in a quality option for the greater accuracy and more user-friendly benefits that they offer. And as long as you use and maintain it correctly and follow these tips, then your components will be optimally adjusted. Hopefully you guys have found this video useful. If you have any questions at all, then please leave some comments below. And if you like what you're seeing on the channel and want to see more videos such as this, then please like and subscribe for more videos.